two-time finalist for the USA Memory Championship, and I will be competing a third time this year, thanks to my sponsors, Quasopoli and Elysian Trust. If you guys remember Dr. Joy Lynn from last year's colloquium. So first, let's just have everyone scan the QR code to have access to the lecture handout. If you don't have a smartphone, I encourage others to share just so that everyone can follow along. Okay, and so I began this journey of my career last year when I was feeling a little bit impulsive in my last semester of college, and I figured I just needed something new to rabbit hole and train in as a coping mechanism, and that's kind of how this all started. This is one of my best friends, Zach. Training with friends cemented knowledge for me better than anything else. I found myself training from dawn to dusk. And I was binging this for a couple of weeks with no expectations of qualifying. Not only do I end up qualifying, I destroy my subsection. And basically, okay, so what this is a score is the number of digits you've memorized, and the time is the amount of time it took you to do it. Dr. Jemian, one of the hosts, who is now my dearest mentor, approaches me at the time and he asks me, "Do you realize that you just threatened a world record?" And I'm like, "I don't know what you're talking about, because the world record for this is Alex Mullen, 11.45 seconds. I have more than double that time." And he's saying to me, "No, you don't understand. That's Alex Mullen at his peak and you've just begun. I've never seen you here before. Like, we think that there could be something here." And so before I knew it, I was in Orlando competing among the 12 best memory athletes in the country. I was unprepared and I didn't win, but that wasn't the goal or point at the time. I knew that I would never be ready, so I just wanted to start. Surprisingly, I was receiving a lot of special attention from John and Nelson, the reigning champions, and I ended up getting invited to the MIT Champion of Champions Memory Tournament, which was for gathering together all the past champions to have them compete against each other. But they made an exception for me because they said, "We just feel like you needed to be there." Now, I was failing all my classes at the time. My best friend, Zach, he gave me really good advice saying, "This isn't a great idea. There will be other opportunities for you to go to MIT. You need to graduate first." And I really appreciated that. I went anyway. Why would I turn down a free trip to MIT? But I still prioritized school first because I just wanted to be there, to be a part of this mission to pioneer and proselytize a sport even if I wasn't going to win. And so that kind of touches on just the why and what brought me to this and my passion for it. It's not just about showing off the glory of the sport, it's about the rhetoric that anyone can do it. And in this age, take it from me, a girl in her early 20s who just graduated, that we don't want to foster cognitive complacency. So I'm gonna break into the pedagogy pretty quickly here, because as much as I love to share about the sport, I'd like to take advantage of this time to do a bit of an intro crash course to the more technical stuff. So I'm gonna start with some common misconceptions to break apart. The first one's a little bit silly. It's that athlete isn't really a stretch. Because first of all, tell me why across a dozen competitors, 4 of them are at least 6'3" and above. They're also buff, and if you think about it, it kind of makes sense, because when it's a difference of 10 seconds, I have to memorize a deck of cards 10 seconds of my other opponent to win. It's just about being sharper and faster. So now we have this running inside joke of, oh, instead of like looking at a tall kid going, "Have you ever thought about basketball?" we go, "Have you thought about memory sports?" Okay, but actually though, I have a bad memory because I'm bad with names. If this statement resonates with anyone, I challenge you to ask yourself this. Is that a memory problem or an attention problem? Why is it that we wouldn't be able to memorize one name? I feel that we're blaming the wrong faculty. No matter how good or bad our attention span is, we know that we can make a conscious decision to pay attention, and that's the first step to memory. I forget names as often as the rest of you. It's because, frankly, if you don't care about this thing, of course you're going to forget it. Second, I was born with a bad memory. We have this assumption that it's genetic disposition. Who are you to talk? Aren't you just naturally gifted? Well, sure, I mean, all things in life kind of work that way. My proclivity, however, does not confirm your inability. In the same way that Olympic athletes all have a gift of some sort, they still have to train relentlessly to get there. I find this to be a bit of an absurd statement because I don't think there is such a thing as bad memory at all. We're just not properly educated on how to harness it. It's sort of like, it reminds me of a lot of people saying that they're bad at math, which is really just them having not been taught the language. It's a bit fallacious, right? It sounds a bit weird if I were to say, I was like born bad at Spanish. You know, like I never, which sure, but I never got the chance to be exposed to it or learn it, right? That doesn't mean that I can't change that, and whether I learn that more quickly or slowly than anyone else, I have the ability to learn it. I shouldn't memorize X because I ought to save space for Y. Let me tell you a story about a motherfucker named Frankie. When I was in high school, I was memorizing digits of pi, and he turns around, he's sort of a try-hard kid, and he's asking me, why are you wasting all this time like memorizing these when you could be memorizing like SAT vocab? Which, first of all, terrible take. Like, you don't study for that. If you have good knowledge of your roots, you're fine. But over and over again, I've been told that what I do is stupid, that it gets dismissed because I'm just wasting my time on useless trivia. And I also hate the rhetoric of, oh, useless knowledge, useless trivia. I think the issue is that we get so used to outsourcing our cognitive faculties to things like a GPS, a calculator, a contact book, that we begin to devolve in assuming that we work in the same way, that we have finite gigabytes of storage and that these will always outperform us. And we will circle back to this, okay? But I mean, I used to be terrible at directions until I just stopped using a GPS for a while. My reason was because I just didn't want to be embarrassed by saying I'm bad at directions. And I do have a learning curve for it, but life isn't fair. You learn some things more easily than others. And these things are great for convenience, but it's a bit scary not only how codependent we become, but how we begin to Pygmalion affect ourselves into devaluing the potential and importance of our abilities. So this creates our ubiquitous issues with approach and belief. So I'd like to prime you guys to start thinking about memory a little bit differently. This is one of my favorite systems ever, the figurative system of human knowledge, the catalyst to the encyclopedia. We can see here that everything, all knowledge in history, and there's some controversies, but like everything can be grouped into something. You can always find your way back and your way back forward. And then to steal a little bit from biology, we have here a cladogram from the Greek kladus, branch, to show relations among organisms, a specific branch to see where we can trace a descendant back to its ancestor. I appreciate this as a general model that everything leads back to something. Now, a lot of people, I think, are stuck in a rigid, like, modus operandi of much like set theory. And this is incredibly limiting because nothing exists in a vacuum, really. On the contrary, I think a better approach is to think of things in category theory, where we study the relationships between things, both inside and outside the model. Now let's apply these models and revisit that last misconception, I need to save space. And I'd like you to think about how we're really thinking of it as the brain as a container with limited space that we fill with memories, where we are needlessly frugal and apathetic about collection. I'd like to instead have you visualize the brain as a fortress, where the memories are building blocks to grow and fortify your architecture. While building is technically finite, we continue to build up and out. This finiteness is irrelevant when we can never reasonably get close to that being an issue. You can continue to forever add height to the Sears Tower, and the issue isn't going to be that you're running out of anything. To reiterate, as harmonious of a relationship as we can have with computers, we don't operate like them at all, and we need to stop thinking as if we do. In computers, memory is instruction accessible. You store the memory, and then the instruction points to the memory, and then when you want that piece of information, you retrieve it. But what we have is far more special. Biological memory is content addressable. It is not stored as an absolute value, it's stored as relations. As graded relations throughout your brain, as a response to the stimuli that you're encountering throughout the course of your life. Everything is linked to everything. Any neuron can reach any other neuron in a number of synapses. One neuron has anywhere from 10,000 to 1,000,000 connections. This is what we call small world architecture. So this is how we usually think of expansion, going up and out. But the way you expand in this context isn't by freeing space. It's by collecting material and building inwards. That seems counterintuitive, but that's how you expand memory. Think about it like this. The baby is born and starts with nothing. And it takes a while to learn some things, and there's a phenomenon that occurs. After a certain critical mass of knowledge or information is achieved or attained, it becomes easier to put in even more knowledge. You have these markers that turn abstract and meaningless information into meaningful information, which makes a path. I feel that often in learning, any hobby, anyone can relate to this. We feel stagnant for a while until all of a sudden it just clicks. And you see these dramatic increases happen in leaps because you need an adequate amount of scaffolding before this next part of your build is processed and complete. We are terrible acontextual learners. It's really, really difficult to learn something without having something related to it. And that's why we're bad with names. And that's just like beyond the memory and attention thing, because there's such arbitrary associations, right? Languages are the most difficult in the beginning because we have no frame of reference to go off of. And so I know for me, I don't really relate to the whole like, oh, I just have so much useless knowledge in my head. Everything I have ever learned and ever will learn is going, like whether that's broadly applicable or esoteric, will always serve me. And so I think it's fundamentally more important to understand this architecture than the mnemonics that I'll share, because you can't really use them as shortcuts or band-aids. You know, just like kind of like those like kung fu masters in the film with the young lads ready for the next crazy thing, and they can't do it, and you're just like, I can't do it, but without understanding the principle, you end up exacerbated. That's why memory palaces fail for a lot of people. So I wanted to offer an alternative Three Little Pigs ending. So, okay, we switch with the endings based on aphorisms, right? You could have one ending where instead of like it having you empty the houses, like maybe the pigs team up and they fight the wolf, and that's how they win. But the one I want to offer is perhaps that their houses are not bricks, but they're concrete castles, and they have such good structural integrity that even an elephant cannot trample through it, and the wolf is now irrelevant as an antagonist. So I say, instead of worrying about dumping contents out of your container or saving space, think about building a fortress, and trust that your brain knows how to reduce, reuse, and recycle. Now, just to touch on some subsets of memory real quick. So we've got explicit and implicit. And then there's also the sensory stuff, and that's kind of, relevant to both. Other ways that we can think about it: declarative and non-declarative, conscious and subconscious, manual and automatic, order and chaos, logic and absurdity. And so in thinking about how we can sort of train that implicit memory, because that's what's most powerful, automatic retrieval, right? We have priming. A good example of this, knowing the word doctor primes you to understand what the word nurse means. Knowledge sets you up for another knowledge. Then you have, classical conditioning. We all know like Pavlov and like the bell and just like that stimulus response. And then you have procedural, which is probably the most common. When you first learn to ride a bike or play an instrument, you're sort of having to think through these motions and you're struggling a bit until it eventually becomes automatic. And as you progress through these things, you're able to focus on other minutiae because now you can just do whatever you had to focus on before. There's an antonym to déjà vu that we call jamais vu, where instead of feeling like you're seeing this, like deja's already, right? Like I've already gone through this. Jamais vu is an interesting concept of, I've done this so many times, but now it feels like the first time. You get that feeling when you've translated something from explicit to implicit, and like for a Rubik's Cube, right? You ask any speed cuber to actually think about it, and then they're gonna get stuck, because it's like, oh, I don't even think about it anymore, and that's when you know that you've made it. Now, moving on to systems of memory, there are a bunch. And it's going to be a bit subjective what you think are going to be the best ones for you, but I'm going to go over the ones that I think are very, very important to know, at least as just like a rudimentary building block. So to go over some basic vocabulary first, let's talk about images. So we're not thinking about visual images here. In memory sports, image has a different meaning. So it can simultaneously be one or all of a stimulus, a concept, and or a response. So a great example of an image is Halloween. Even if you forget the word, we know the holistic image. Which is going to trigger for us subconsciously like a million different images, from like a jack-o'-lantern to a nurse to Halloween costumes to the word Halloween. And then we have the artificial versus natural images. Artificial is usually going to be a new image that we try to adhere to our brain, whereas like a naturally received one is one that we don't even have to try, like the holiday, right? We have images for what holidays are. We know when they are. We never study them, but we know all of them. And then we usually call it a memory currency because it's one of the most valuable currencies a memory athlete can have. So on my document, there is another QR code, and I encourage you, as you learn more about it and understand it, to please donate to my memory shrine. But, okay. So here's an example of an image that one of my friends has of me. So the thing about images is that the more bizarre and evocative they are, the more likely they are to stick. And what's really magical about them is, images can evolve. There are objective and subjective elements. There are elements that are like unanimously shared and very unique, right? A good example I can think of is like for the Halloween one. I bet Tim Burton is an image is a part of a lot of people's images for the people that have seen it, and not for the people that haven't seen it. But I know that this is like one of my favorite snacks is just torching a peep, because it like caramelizes the outer layer. And my friend thought I was insane for that. And he told me, Pate, one of my images for you, it's like I see like a burning peep. I see a peep on fire when I think of you. And I encourage you to give that some thought, because it's also really helpful in terms of like, relationship processing and trauma processing. It's just like, what is your image of someone? What is your image of a concept, right? And so other memory building blocks. With a chain, you have to start from the beginning, like an alphabet, a song, an acronym. You're appending a new image to a new image. With a peg, there's plastic and wooden, where plastic is taking a new image to a new image, and a wooden is a new to an old image. Anchors are core images that you'll never forget. Languages will forget over time, and we can refresh them. And those are, old images for wooden pegs, but we'll never forget. A lot of us will never forget our parents, whether you like them or not, whether you have much relationship or not, right? And so people are usually the best anchors, and anchors are the best block to add to a locus. And don't worry, I'll put more detail on this later. But what is a locus, right? Locus, we think of place in Greek, and it's what you use to store all of these. And think of these as, you can spend your currency, your time and investment to build these on your system based on what you want to do. So this is an example of chain linking, right? I hated these in school. I hated the whole you have to just add all this knowledge just to only be able to linearly recall. And then an example of what I hate in language learning. If anyone has ever studied French, I think this is stupid. You can't really just pause in conversation and go, wait, let me recall the right verb to use, right? Again, this is very, very explicit and decorative, and that's not really what we want to do. Chain linking, it doesn't mean chain linking doesn't have its usages. It's very, very fast, but it's not very accurate, and it's not very, evocative. This is an example of one of my personal peg lists. So I love using the native phonetic alphabet because I learned it when I was young and it naturally comes to me. And so in thinking about a structured peg, right? Let's say I want to go get groceries, and there's a specific order I want to go in order to navigate the aisles properly. So let's say in chronological order, I have to get oranges and then apples and then broccoli, right? And what you're doing is you're going to append that, you're going to peg it to your old list, the one that you have memorized by heart. And you create an image, you make something that makes sense to you, and then that's how you're able to have something that sticks better than just trying to remember with nothing for it to adhere to what you want to remember. So, let's see. Okay, I don't have my whiteboard, so it's going to be difficult for me to do an example, but I wanted to do an example of skirt, photo, and girl. So just bear with me and following along verbally. If we were to chain together skirt, photo, and girl, an example of that is what we call story method. And something like that would be saying like I saw a girl in a skirt, and then I took a photo of this girl. And again, like in a vacuum, not too difficult to do. Pegging it would be something more like, oh, here's one image I'm going to layer on where I see a girl in a skirt. The skirt's not a plain skirt, it's a weird pattern where on the skirt you see a photo of a girl, right? And then there is an art to sorting information, and this is where all that comes in pretty relevantly, because I know for a lot of memory athletes, I've noticed sometimes whenever they're chaining these together, right? And this is one page out of 6 where we had to memorize all 64 national parks and all this data in a matter of a week. It's a little bit hard. Okay, all of this information, and then you're being called on stage to recall it, right? If you're chaining things and you lose one chain, what's most fragile about it is you lose the rest of your information, right? Again, alphabet recall, most of us have to start at the beginning. When you're pegging it, and when you're trying to think of one more holistic image, it suddenly becomes a lot easier where this will trigger this, and that will trigger that, and everything will trigger everything instead of just having to follow a line. And then there's flashing, which is probably the answer to the question of how do I, train explicit to implicit, right? And this one I would consider procedural, but this is an example of a system that I came up with for memorizing cards that I have since scrapped, and that's part of the process. You experiment with things and you see how they work. But what I was trying to do here was, I know that sound and music is very powerful, and so what I wanted to do was I made it so that every single card had an association with a note or a sound. And what I did was I made this program in Python where basically I just had it so that it would show me an image of the card and it would play the note, and I had to type in one or the other thing, and I drilled this over and over again, maybe over the course of like just a couple of hours. It doesn't take that long, until finally, without hearing I hear the stimulus, I get the response. So then when I memorize cards, this is a technique I used in qualifiers. When I was memorizing cards, I was hearing a series of notes, and I was hearing a melody that I could recall, and because it's automatic again, I'm able to come up with the card that I needed. And so flashing, this is also used in mental math, where if anyone has ever competed in a calculator competition, we know it's not really about the techniques of, how do you do this double-digit multiplication, whatever. It's about when you see, here, I want to see if I can actually show you this example. Because what this website was, and it's a lot of fun, it flashes a bunch of numbers at you, and you're not supposed to read it, you're supposed to just process it. And when it's flashing all these numbers at you, it asks you to add them all together, you just have the answer. So, now let's get into the fun part here. So, systems. First, we have person, action, object. We use this a lot as a beginner method for cards, but it's also considered a building block. So, here you can see an example of how someone decided to split up the suits into these different categories. Again, you can be creative with it, you do what makes sense to you. I know for a lot of people, they'll do family for hearts, it's pretty popular. They'll do celebrities for clubs, right? And what you're doing is you're taking, so for each card, you're assigning 3 images where it's really one image, and this image has to make sense as a whole. So for example, the heart one. I know, because family's popular one, right? I know some people might do King of Hearts is their dad and Queen of Hearts is their mom. And so basically the action and the object that follows are the first thing that they can think of that makes sense to them in terms of okay, let's say your dad has, he has this hobby of playing golf, right? So the action and object can be my dad is swinging at a golf ball. Or my mom is cooking and then whatever her favorite dish is, right? And so you end up with a very unique person, action, object. It sounds like it's 52 times 3 images, it's still 52 because they all should make sense, right? What's fun about this is you get a unique story once you finally get your cards. And so let's say, you get this card, and this card in order. What you're seeing is Tom Brady polishing a golf club. And so when you're memorizing a full deck of cards, 52 cards all of a sudden becomes 18? And so you're seeing like a series of images, and then again, when you're flashing these, right, and this becomes instinctive, as you do your card recall, you're able to piece together the story. And this is how we usually have the gateway to memory sports, because a lot of just the average person loves PAO. And I've heard so many stories of I never thought I could memorize a deck of cards, and this is usually how people do it the first time. Next, this is a fun one, the major system. So this is a language, and if you refer to the handout, I have like a couple of other images to refer to, like what that for reference. But this is a system that is excellent for keeping track of things. Like in mental math, when I know for a lot of people, the hard part about that isn't the arithmetic. It's like, oh, how do I hold on to these numbers that I have to add together, right? And so each numeral is associated with one or more consonants. The link is to the sound and not the letter, which makes it seamless. And so take like C in cat, Cynthia, cello, and they'll each have different values, even though they're spelled differently, right? So it gets rid of a lot of the semantic errors that a lot of systems usually have. And then the semi-vowels and like consonant H are ignored, and these are used as sort of fillers to make sensible words from the resulting consonant sequences. And so it's actually really fun. Like a lot of memory athletes love to speak in major language, and it's a little bit of our secret language, because I remember we're at an Airbnb, and my co-athlete was asking me, what's the passcode to the door again? I said to him, walking peach. And he immediately knew to type in 7296, because and I know like one of my friends, she struggled to remember her own apartment code for like something to do with the Wi-Fi. And she's like, I can just never get these numbers to stick in my head. And I thought of the first one I could think of. I was like, Malaria Bay. Like I come to your house, it's just like, it's Malaria Bay, just like it's dangerous here, whatever, right? Something that's totally absurd. And she's not even fluent in major language, but she struggles to like find the code in her notes, right? But because there's always like, even with internet, she can like look up the key and access it. Since then, she's never forgotten that code. And then we have the digit system, and this is just an example of my own personal digit system. So digit systems, we have like 2 and 3 digit most commonly. 4 we're not going to get into. 1 is useless. A 2-digit system, 0 to 99. And there's going to be some numbers that come naturally to you as an image already, right? So I know like 42 for life for some people. And even mathematical images, because again, images aren't visual. Like if I think of 36, that's an image to me because it's 6 squared, right? And so basically what I was doing here was I flashed all of these, and I have like very strong associations between the images that I have associated with these and the number. So every time I think about the number 9, every time I think about the number 3, right, I think about a battery, a lithium battery. And then every time I think about, let's say like 9, I have toothpaste, 17, I'll have a pool, right? And so I know, for example, like if and this starts to happen automatically, right? I'll think about how, I don't know, let me pick a state. I'll think about how I know that California was admitted to the US on 9/9/1850. And I think about that because I imagine, it's a golden state, so I imagine golden toothpaste. And so what we're doing with digit systems is you make out a list and you identify all the integers in which you don't have an image for, right? Because they're still abstract. And you assign an image. And once you do that, it's a matter of learning your own language until you have something for the pair. Because now instead of memorizing 10 numbers when you're memorizing phone number, that already cuts it down in half, right? Because you're seeing pairs, and that's not accounting for the accidental images. You can do this freelance, or you can use major system, for example, to assign something if you learn it, or you can even use PAO to assign it to your digit system. So there's a lot of different avenues that you can take in going about this. And then 3-digit, I'd say 2-digit, and I left a template on this in my handout, which is very print friendly. Most people can do that in a day. If you're determined, most people can learn it in a day. 3-digit is very, very popular. It is used both by hobbyists and by the most competitive mental athletes. 4-digit is breaking into maybe a grandmaster territory, but 3-digit is pretty self-explanatory, right? It's the same thing, but now here's a bit of a investment to think of, right? It's 0 to 999, so we have 1,000 images. But what that means is once you've learned that, and I'd say on average, it takes about like a month to a few months to learn, and this isn't with studying, this is just with repeated exposure. Once you have it learned, your life becomes so much easier because of how just all of a sudden you can see things in two and like images of 2s and 3s. Because we know how like chunking and grouping already helps memory, right? Whether that's with like saying a phone number and then there's a 555, or there's a 1, 2, 3, there's a crescendo, there's natural images. But what you're doing for yourself is you're making that happen all the time. And it's a lot of fun because you start seeing coincidences more and more all the time. So for example, like this system is very personal to me, right? But I know for number 18, argon, I associate it with a light bulb. So I think of 18, I think of a light bulb. I remember in my French history class, we're learning about enlightenment and it's 18th century and I'm like, oh my God, like there's no way. And I have those moments all the time because it's conducive to one of those moments, right? And so things become, again, you're scaffolding, things become even more and more memorable just the more and more you learn. Now, I actually saved this for last, despite this probably being the most well-known method. But what we normally know this as, right? For anyone that doesn't know, is the memory palace method. You choose one chronological order, it has to be the same every time, clockwise, anti-clockwise. So let's say like you start here, 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 right? And usually that works. This is pegging. So you're essentially doing a peg list where, okay, if you visualize an object here, do this, do this, do this, do this. I think on its own, it's not very effective. It's not very fast. And it's very limited because in reality, and I included this in my handout, there's like a sort of structural, like you have to think about structural integrity. There's a limit to what you can do. This is limited to like 4 to 6 objects really. You can only memorize like so many like, loci in your house and make sure that you have in the same order every time. There's a fun layer we can add to this, which is called a Roman room, where let's say we have a bedroom over here, right? Maybe instead of placing something in the bedroom, we enter the bedroom. And all of a sudden, it's a multiplier where that bedroom now becomes a new palace, like a little bit of Russian doll, right? And now inside that bedroom, you can choose 5 new places, 5 new loci, like the bed, the window, your desk, just like the door, right? And sometimes if you're feeling a little bit intense about it, you can even add one more Roman room if you know something really well. So I know for a lot of people, if your desk stays the same, that's another Roman room. So you go to your desk, and then all of a sudden you have another Roman room of like, okay, here's like my mouse pad, my keyboard, my computer. And then after that, there's only so many layers you can add until it's a little bit too esoteric. But what that means is all of a sudden, instead of having like just these 5, right? If you have Roman rooms for every single place, like the kitchen, I love kitchen Roman rooms because like I just use a stove and I'll use like a fridge, things like that, right? That's how you're able to layer it properly so then you can go from 5 to 15. Now here's a little bit of an interesting figure that I was doing in my calculations. A lot of people, I noticed a lot of people like into memory sports, they end up with a palace with an average of 4,000 images. So this is like for the amateur hobbyists. How do we get to the number 4,000? Well, think about a lot of what we just reviewed, right? So for the cost benefit, again, people are being way too frugal with the whole wasting space, right? So when I was touching earlier on, okay, what system do I memorize? Again, wrong mindset. It's not which systems do I have to limit myself to spending the time to memorize. It's just how many can I memorize? Because the more you memorize, the better. And even if you have to scrap it, even if you think it's useless, then trust me, there's something that you can use with it as an element. So a very popular combination, but there's a million different combinations based on your natural synesthesia, your natural propensity, right? The memory palace should not be taught as a sole thing. It's meant to be interwoven with all of these other systems seamlessly. And getting back to those chains and pegs and anchors, right? What we can do is we can make something much more intricate where, and again, I can't use my whiteboard right now, but now we imagine, okay, with the palaces and Roman rooms, that sounds good enough, but that's still pretty bare bones. Imagine with every palace location, like a loci, you add in an anchor. And the best anchors are people, right? So for example, If there's someone you would always associate with being in the kitchen, you put them in the kitchen. If there's something someone you would always associate with, like let's say like playing around in like the living room, you put them there. You assign one person, you stick to that. And even in story method, even in chain linking, that makes it a lot more easy, right? So like the skirt photo girl example, if all of a sudden the girl is someone you know, it's a lot easier to remember. And so very, very common to add anchors to each loci so that now you have a person that you know interacting with the object. If you think about the peg list, which in and of itself is like its own palace, right? I know that for my peg list, it's not just an alphabetical like NATO list. I have a person I know that I append to every single element as an anchor, where like the first friend I think of that with the name starting with A, the first friend I think of with the name starting with B, etc. And so now it's just, you have more things for it to stick onto, because again, we have to think of this as we're trying to stick this on with adhesive, and we need stronger adhesive and more adhesive, right? And so there's a lot of fun that you can have with this, and part of what I was putting in this handout, the Pate structure, which is modeled off of Lewis dot structure, is a way for you to sort of do this design, build, test system, where you can sort of visualize how feeble or how effective your system would be based on how you want to design it. And then you just keep testing it and you see what sticks. And so this is just for giving us some order, but implicitly, a lot more happens, right? Because, where's my pointer? Because what we have with the implicit memory going along with it is a bunch of little multipliers that we are not even aware of, right? Where, okay, it's like image, image, image. And then we have all these other ways in which our brain will continue to help us, and the more we feed it, the more likely it is to do so. And so, getting it back a bit to the sport, what does memory athlete training look like? So a lot of it is declarative practicing and non-declarative, which is, like flashing, right? So palace building, systems testing, a lot of the long-term and short-term. I left links in the memory shrine to sites that I use. And additionally, physical training is actually a huge part of it, because after you've perfected your systems, right, I referenced like how buff a lot of these guys were, it's just speed. Brains and brawn work together. And so competitors do train full-time, just like Olympic athletes do. And this training is usually a mix of physical and cognitive, 4 hours a day for someone nationally ranked, and anywhere between 8 to 10 hours a day for the international players. And this involves and isn't limited to, just reusing the systems over and over again, doing a long-term maintenance of palaces and things like that. I remember this guy in my apartment elevator, always I would get in the elevator, he was always boxing. And at first I thought it was kind of weird. And then I found out he was like a clouded college boxer or something. And I realize now that I relate, because it's kind of just what you have to do. You have to just be constantly practicing for your sport. Again, we're not studying, we're practicing. And I remember I wore a face mask to school so that I could recite long-term data and I didn't look like a crazy person talking to myself on the bus, even though that's exactly what I was. And so it requires a lot of consistency and maintenance, just like with physically working out the gym, right? It's a language, and furthermore, it's your language. And so usually when you want to go a step further with the daily exercise routine, it combines super well. And I know my athletes, Nelson and John, they call it chaos training. They'll do these weird, okay, I'm not educated with the gym lingo, but they'll do their supersets and stuff. They'll do their sets of whether it's push day or pull day or whatever, right? And we have the same thing for the brain. We do days of training flexibility, speed, memory, problem solving, things like that. He'll do okay, it's I do push-ups to failure, and then I go back my deck of cards, and then I do this set of things, and then I go do this exercise, and it sounds crazy, but they're champions, right? And so, yeah, I think and when people ask me with this, okay, Pate, what the hell, why haven't you been training that extensively then? And I think my priority with this, first of all, is just to do what feels fun and fulfilling for me. Like I said, it's not glory. Last year I competed despite not being ready, because I'll never be ready. But I do just want to continue to be as part of the sport, invest in it, which is why in the short term, I'm not focused on winning. I wanted this past year to, begin writing books and giving these lectures and making videos. I'm working on an app with my business partner to do a bit more to make the heuristic process a bit more accessible, and then just sit back and train while that passively sits there. but the sport taught me that I didn't want to be complacent where I didn't want to actively choose to be. Now, the potential as a spectator sport. I do believe this to be an untapped gold mine. This is me and Briley Lewis, the champion of the MIT 2024 tournament. I feel like this is an untapped gold mine in terms of, spectatorship, and we need the right people, not just academics for the watchability of TV, but everything else is there. If we think about it, we're watching physical sports. People are just hitting a ball back and forth for a couple hours. What's really so entertaining about that, right? But there's multiple things, right? So first of all, just like there's characters in these athletes, and like besides all of what I just shared about why the sport itself is fun. Okay, after having gone twice, my conclusion is half of these people are some of the coolest people I've met in the world. The other half of them, I think, are insane and belong in psych wards, and I hate them. But that also, what that means is that it's amazing for TV. We don't need a script. We don't need a plot. There's so much plot going on. And the short story I'll give you behind this photo, right? And this isn't to sensationalize anything. Like, this was just something that MIT was an incredibly emotional experience for me. And Briley was one of my close friends that I made back in Orlando. The sportsmanship of this sport is incredible, but he was one of the people that, he had an intervention talk with me almost up till 3 a.m. the night after the competition, where he was telling me I need you're going to come back, right? You're not going to quit, right? When observing how you compete, I feel like you can be the person that wins next year just after, because right now, Nelson and John, the reigning champions, have retired, so there's a bit of a new generation stepping up. And he was telling me, I feel I want to tell you that, I think that you're one of the best athletes here, and I don't want you to quit, which is crazy to hear from someone that's technically your rival. But that was very, very touching to me, and we always had this sort of pact, right? And then MIT comes, and we have plans to okay, we're gonna take a day off and have fun before the competition, no training, whatever, just let ourselves go free, right? Plans get canceled because he's there with his family and his mom gets very, very sick. And so I imagine it's a bit hard to go through a competition like this when you're sort of just worried in the back of your head about what's going to happen, right? I was hoping to get sleep before the competition, and neither of us did, because he calls me up at midnight the day of the competition to tell me that his mother passed away at Cambridge Hospital. And I'm stunned. He's telling me all of this. I'm asking if he's okay. I'm asking if he needs anything. I'm willing to just forego the competition, just be there for him. It was a very, very sudden and just terrible timing, right? And he tells me, no, I think I still want to go compete tomorrow. It's what she would have wanted. I just wanted to ask you for this favor of if you sort of help just look out for me, because usually once we get there, we're hounded by press and we're harassed by all these people. And so I told him, yeah, just you don't have to talk about it. I'll be there for you, right? And so competition day, he's so down, and it's so heartbreaking. But we go on and we compete anyway. It's still a fun time. And then after I'm eliminated, I'm sitting in the crowd with my friend Alex, and we're watching the final double-decker bust. 104 cards shuffled together. Every athlete gets the same shuffle. You do recall round robin style, and it's sudden death until you get to the winner. And my friend is asking me, who do you think is gonna win? Who are you placing your bets on? I placed my bets on Grace, who was a good bet because she ended up in second place. And I said, I don't know. This isn't because he's my friend, but adrenaline has taken me very far, many times, and I was observing him, and I was like, I think Briley is going to win. I don't know what it is, but I think he's going to. And this gets very tense because we're holding our breath as they're doing the recall, and we're getting close to the 100th card. And it's between Briley and Grace, until finally, the moment Grace gets a card wrong, again, there's natural suspense to this, right? I just see Briley, he knows, right? And he immediately starts sobbing, and I start crying, and everyone thinks it's just because, he's just so happy to win, right? No one has any idea, why he's sobbing so much. But, it's because, it's because there's so, there was a lot in it for him, right? And finally, he's giving his thank yous, and he's thanking everyone that was there, and then thanking everyone that couldn't, like thanking like the one person that couldn't be there. And it's this incredible moment that I only have these images of because my friend took them, and otherwise it would have been lost in the recording. But you know, just that, like, there was an incredible feat achieved here because he's also new and he hadn't been, you know, it was his first year competing too, right? And so I thought that there was like a lot of inspiration to take away from that. And we had this amazing moment where on stage, we sort of, we have this pact and we shake hands. It's almost like, sort of like a ending of season 1 anime type thing, where he's like, I better see you back here next year. It's like, I want to see you in the final 3. I want to go head to head against you. And I tell him he has a deal. And we all made this promise that like one person's win was the other person's win, and we would hold that trophy together. And so, again, the rhetoric of the sport being that anyone can do it. Not necessarily that anyone can be competitive, but anyone can improve by imperceivable bounds. We've seen plenty of photos of like amazing weight loss journeys, so this is possible for everybody. And the cool thing about this competition is there's usually intermissions from Dr. Jemian and MIT's research that they do on subjects where they take MRIs before and after training, and there's just like proof that the hippocampus widens with training and that it gets better over time. And because improvement is logarithmic, it gets addicting because it's so dramatic. And so some takeaways. First, the build mindset. When we have all this fear mongering instead of building with, how long until AI can replace everything that we do? I don't know about that. The brain, okay, as someone that's like really have their foot in this, right? The brain is the most complex structure we know of anywhere. Sure, computers can like perform processes, but not as efficiently, and we just don't see that because it doesn't take much for things to seem instantaneous to us. The cost benefit is still kind of wild, right? Like, computers have to release like a fuck ton of heat into the environment to compute such grand processes. Our brains aren't closed systems like that. Our ultimate superpower is that subconscious ability I was mentioning earlier. It's a gift that biology grants us that can never be synthesized, and it's why we prioritize training that faculty. And just like they're more like open thermodynamic systems, massively parallel, highly interconnected, unreasonably energy efficient by nature. And I don't know, you might be thinking, well, computers process a lot more than we do, and like, yes, declaratively. We have another dimension that we cannot begin to fathom. How is it that we're so individually abstract, yet all interact so gracefully with the physical universe over 7 orders of magnitude? With like neurotransmitters operating on 100 nanometers a second and human behavior operating on meters per second with a constantly changing environment, right? And so that addicting improvement I mentioned, it's logarithmic in a short-term individual vacuum, but overall, it's not. We can't call defeat if we haven't seen signs yet. Life expectancy has only ever increased. And if we were even close to hitting the maximum of the human potential of the mind, like, that would be reflected. The fact that brainflation persists among all mind sports, that year after year, records across every single one that I observed get broken faster and faster and more dramatically, sort of represents something. I'm not suggesting that there isn't a plateau, I just don't really think that we're that close. And so what I wanted to offer here was an informed stance through a different framework. I'm a proponent, but not trying to really proselytize, I'm not trying to sell it. And I think that, we gotta think of it just like, like in a different framework of, instead of, when we're looking through a camera, we're not just like panning it around, just like trying out different lenses to these things, right? I'm not trying to form a convincing argument, I just want to give an idea. And okay, maybe we can't like change the systems, we can't save the world in a day, but just think about it, right? I pose you this instead of like the fearful idea of what computers will be able to do over us, but with the power that we have, whose evolution do you actually anticipate? And the floor will be open for questions. Yes, sir.
Yes. Has your organization looked into some of the things that have happened over the years, just for the human? Forget about the AI for a minute, because this is a personal benefit for every individual. But I could tell you that over the years, you've had the National Scrabble Association, you've had National Puzzlers League, and and they do have memberships, they have dues and things like that. But do you have any way in which you can try to attract people into your organization, let them know? There have been books about how to improve your memory, many things. Merv Griffin invested some money into some shows about doing the crossword puzzles. It flopped. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, it's just wait.
Okay, yeah, so anyway, I hope that your organization, which is doing something very good for individuals, I don't know if you'll ever be able to monetize it that much, but at least, try to get enough support so you can get members paying a modest amount of dues and, kind of get people interested in the idea of improving their memories. Things have been done. I live in LA. Years ago, there was a guy named Art Bornstein who had a memory school. And so...
What's the question?
No, it's an idea.
Okay.
Okay, so...
Ask a question.
Oh, okay. Well, the question would be, have you tried something like this yet?
Thank you.
So I'm actually in the process of doing something like this, and it was actually Dr. Lin who advised me to begin an LLC for this. I have NeuroPlay as a placeholder, but to tell a bit about my role and what I've been doing, so a long time ago, I used to do some Twitch streaming, and I did Simon streams, and I thought that would be too boring for people to watch, but I was surprised at how much money I was making with that. And I wanted to start again doing some, basically working on longer form YouTube content, just, like educational resources for people to actually learn about how these things work and how to approach it, doing podcasts with some of the champions, and just like in general, like doing collaborations with other, just like other mind sports athletes. I know that one of my personal best friends won the National Spelling Bee this year, and we were wanting to do a video, just like, doing even like kind of like sports commentary reaction videos, because like we want to turn into college football in a way. And so what I've been doing is right now, like I have like the process of content going on, I have the app that I'm developing with my friend. And so I've had a lot of people believe in this project. The fact that I had this friend, like he had quit his Amazon job and he's like fully dedicated to this app that we're working on. And I have a UX UI designer as well, but I was going to continue to just like see where things go for a while. I'm working on like board games and things like that. And as people sort of get intrigued and like naturally contribute, what my main goal of this is at the very end, I want this content, a lot like Khan Academy, to be free and accessible. And I was very lucky that I met business partners that are aligned with that same mission, where Kevin and I, the business partner, who's doing just all the coding for this app, like 8 hours a day, we asked each other questions like, would you sell out this for like 5 million if it ever came to that? And we both were like, no, we want to make this free for people, and that's the difference right now, because I know every memory app that's on the App Store, and they're all blocked with a paywall. So I feel like I believe in the mission of it, and I believe that sincerity in the long term will go a longer way in monetization than trying to monetize it will. Although usually a lot of the monetization for athletes is like one-on-one coaching, which I intend to try out at some point. So, hold on. Yes, sir, I'm going to hand you a mic.